Welcome to On the Issues. I'm Councilman Jim Waring. Joining me on today's show is Phoenix Aviation Department Director Jim Bennett. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
First thing I have to say is we won. So I feel like we won the Super Bowl or something. So we'll explain. But Phoenix sued the FAA, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Certainly. Well, as you indicated, Phoenix sued the FAA, and Phoenix actually won the lawsuit, which is very much a rarity whenever you challenge the FAA on things like flight paths.
And we knew that going in.
We knew it was an uphill battle, but did the right thing, and as a result, we now have an opportunity to try to put the flight paths back to where they used to be in and out of Sky Harbor.
So maybe just a little bit about the history, and I did think that was the right thing, even though, you know, maybe there was a 20% chance or something of us pulling this off. We had many citizens really upset, including in my area, but also obviously downtown, the historic districts. The FAA made changes in September, October of 2014.
September of 2014, they instituted new departure and arrival procedures in and out of Sky Harbor, and immediately, you know, the community felt the impact of that. And they
people had no idea that this happened.
And the community,
all of a sudden, we're like, hey, wait a minute, you know, what's going on here?
The community had received no advance notification or no opportunity to participate in the planning for the changes in and out of Sky Harbor. And you know, the city then tried for several months to negotiate some type of remediation to make the conditions in the Phoenix area better for the citizens, up to and including trying to put them back to where the flight paths had been previously. And those negotiations and discussions with the FAA were not successful. So then in June of 15, the city filed suit, and then shortly thereafter, neighborhood associations in the historic district also filed suit. And that is, you know.
But we worked together.
We worked together, actually, partners all along.
Nobody was getting thrown under the bus. We were all working together going forward.
Working together. And so then in August of 2017, the DC Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with the city and the neighborhood associations, and they vacated the changes and remanded it back to the FAA. And so for the past several months, we worked with the FAA to come up with a way to implement changes to the flight paths. And then hopefully on April the 1st, we're still tracking to be on schedule so that the westerly departures out of Sky Harbor will return to approximate the departures before September of 2014.
And I forget exactly when you came on, but you were not the aviation director in September of 2014. I forget how much after did you come on board?
I came on in October, the 1st of October of 2015.
So this is a mess you inherited. I'm surprised you took the job, given that all the falderall and the calls and so forth, and then frankly the complaints on behalf of constituents from council members. But so, you know, you can't just change the routes back from one day to the next. So you won the lawsuit 6 months or so ago. Right. Yeah, and then we're working since then to sort of rectify this wrong.
Exactly, and the FAA is going to do this in really a two-step process. That's what the city, neighborhood associations, and the FAA agreed to, which is a two-step process. Step one, which will be effective, as I mentioned, 1st of April, will return the westerly departures to where they were prior to September of 2014. And then step two is an additional opportunity to change any flight procedures different than the westerly departures out of Sky Harbor. And that's why these 3 recently completed public workshops and the recently closed comment period back on February 16th. That's why it was very important for folks to attend either one of those workshops or submit their comments online so that we could inform the FAA that it wasn't necessarily just the westerly departures out of Sky Harbor. There are a few other areas that need some attention.
Well, they didn't. They seemed surprised to hear from folks in Northeast Phoenix, which is a ways away from the airport, that there were complaints. But we actually had the most heavily attended meeting, I think you told me, about 250 people, and that's a lot for a public meeting on I think it was a Thursday night. You know, the public meetings were something, frankly, that I personally pushed for, I felt were necessary. I did not feel comfortable with you or I, who are not responsible for this mess, to be out there as the face person explaining this lawsuit. I felt it was much better that the FAA did it, and they brought a lot of folks. I mean, I have to say, they did not do half measures. They had a lot of folks there from their legal team and staff and so forth to explain this to people, because certainly I'm not qualified to do that. And while you may be qualified, it's not really your role to be explaining their mess, frankly, and how it's going to get fixed. That's not fair to you, and really isn't fair to the city. So they've been working to make these changes. We've had the public comment period. The westerly routes are going to be changed back, basically, in April 1st. But that has a ripple effect throughout the city. It's not like it's just the people who live directly west of the airport who are affected. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, the changes that will be taking place April 1st really only will impact the folks on the west side of the airport, because the rest of the procedures that are in place throughout the valley are not being changed on the 1st of April. That's what might be changed if FAA decides that they've received enough input from communities, such as up in your district, on issues that need to be addressed in this step 2. And so that's when those changes could be considered. And that's up to the FAA. And I'll be perfectly honest with everyone, that's in the agreement. The FAA is taking all of this information on, and they will make those changes in step 2 if they feel that in their analysis that there are changes that could be made to improve on the noise situation, but also not impact the safety and the operation of the airspace in and around the valley.
And we don't want them to impact the safety. So going forward, we had the 250 folks come, had a lot of citizen input. I know it's impossible for you to say with any kind of certainty, but do you think that was a pretty good showing? I know it was the most in the 3 meetings we had in the Valley, but compared to other places where they've had these kind of public meetings.
It was a very good showing for that type of a public workshop. And really, congratulations to you for pushing to make sure that they did hold one of those workshops in the Northeast Valley to hear the concerns of the folks up in the Northeast Valley.
I was disappointed we didn't get more. We tried to let everybody know,
But that meeting would not have taken place if not for your insistence.
They seem blissfully unaware. I don't understand that.
Very much, and I think it was
I was one of the more vocal members about it, so you'd think that they would connect those dots.
But I think it was very educational and informative for them as to what is going on in the Valley and other areas. And then also, though, it also points to the complexity of airspace issues. Because not only do you have, we're looking at Sky Harbor and changes made at Sky Harbor.
And that's why I mentioned the ripple effects.
But it also
interlocking pieces.
It impacts Scottsdale Airport, Deer Valley Airport, Goodyear Airport, Glendale Airport, Mesa Falconville, Mesa Gateway Airport. Airports all over the valley are impacted when you move. It's like the proverbial jello. You push on one place, it may impact. It may squeeze out on another location. So you have to be very thoughtful when you make changes.
Yeah, and my district goes right up Scottsdale Road, which obviously the other side of Scottsdale Road at certain parts are directly impacted by the behavior of Scottsdale Airport pilots and the FAA and so forth there. So any changes to Sky Harbor has a ripple effect out to affect the other airports, as you suggested. It was the supposition, I think, of residents was not so much that they were hearing Phoenix Sky Harbor air traffic necessarily, but they were hearing traffic that had changed routes from some of these other airports. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. And some of those changes that were made at Scottsdale Airport actually took place as a result, they took place in the Super Bowl of 2015.
Yep, when we did have a big spike, I think, in complaints.
And because they changed departure procedures out of Scottsdale Airport so that they could get aircraft out more effectively and efficiently, and then that departure procedure stayed once it was made.
Yeah. Well, and that certainly tracks with what we heard from citizens. Are we still doing the mobile noise monitors that were put in place?
We are. We certainly are.
Is there still a lot of demand for that, given how the lawsuit has gone? Are people still using those? Because we can go out and put that right by your house, basically, and have, frankly, from people who have had concerns.
Yeah, the demand has certainly gone down. Sure. And we may see some increases as a result of the changes that are going to take place on 1st of April, but the demand has gone down a little bit.
Yeah. So it's a big issue. I think the city, I think we can honestly say we did what we could to rectify what frankly, I considered a wrong. Again, it was before your time. It wasn't always as well managed by the aviation department maybe as it could have been. But hopefully it gets corrected to the extent it's correctable. And the FAA, I think, certainly understands, losing in court like they did, like you said, they always have the safety card to play. And I don't say that loosely. It's not just a card, it's a real thing. So we don't want them to compromise that, of course. But the bottom line was, judges ruled they lost. And, we're trying to make the most of that to put it back to the way it was before. And then that's a good thing. So I appreciate you and your staff and our attorneys working on this and making this a more acceptable situation for residents.
Well, our goal is to try to get the airport back in harmony with the community. For us to be successful and for us to continue to serve the needs of Phoenix and Arizona with good air transportation, we need to be in harmony with the community we're serving. And when you make changes like happened in September of 2014, you get out of sync with the community, and that's not good for anyone.
Yeah, and the whole point of the long, rather lengthy public process that they normally go through is to avoid just this kind of situation, so at least people know and they can weigh in how it's going to affect them. And that didn't really happen, so we're kind of getting a little bit of a do-over. And hopefully we'll have a better result this next time.
Let's hope so.
So, switching gears, the airport, big economic engine for the Valley. I guess I'll start with this, and it's not necessarily intended as a negative, but where do we stand as an airport? We're usually in the top 10 in air traffic. I think we slipped out. Were we 12th in the last ranking I saw? Could you speak a little bit about what that looks like to the uninitiated?
Sure. Sky Harbor used to be number 10 in the top 10.
Pretty consistently, right?
Pretty consistently within U.S. domestic airports, or within the United States. But in the past couple of years, we've slipped down, as you noted, to number 12, perhaps number 13 as a result of 2017 results. And it's really not a result of bad things happening in Phoenix. It's just that other airports have been growing at a pace faster than what has been taking place here in Phoenix. And the reason for some of that is what is going on in the airline industry with various carriers and their decisions to expand and or grow certain hubs. For instance, Seattle has had a huge increase in the past few years because Delta Airlines decided to make that a big focus for them, and they've poured a lot of capacity into the Seattle market. As a result, they grew very rapidly. Then you take even Charlotte, North Carolina, where American has a big hub. They decided to focus more activity on Charlotte and expand and fortify that hub that they have there. So you saw them grow. Then you take an airport like Philadelphia, where they decided to de-emphasize Philadelphia a little bit, and you saw Philadelphia pull down. So there's been some moving and shifting. But 2017 was the second busiest year that Sky Harbor's ever had. And only 2015 was busier, but only by about 80,000 passengers in 2015.
Which is a rather de minimis number compared to the overall. What we have, how many millions?
44 million.
I was going to say 44 million, yeah.
And so 2017 was a great year. And so far this year, we're growing at not quite 2% annual increase. And you say 2%, but 2% when you're talking about 44 million is a fairly large number. Certainly is.
So people shouldn't be concerned when they see that ranking. That's a little bit more of a misleading item. If people take away from it, oh, we're somehow shrinking, fewer people are visiting, that is actually not true.
That is correct. That is not true. In fact, what we have seen is actually, you have two different types of passengers. And what we have seen for the past 2 years, 2.5 years, is that what we call the origin and destination passengers, those passengers that are actually either coming to Phoenix or leaving from Phoenix, that has been growing at about 5 or 6% per year, as opposed to connecting traffic. So what we've seen is the connecting passengers, those that are just changing planes at Sky Harbor, that number has been going down. But the people actually coming to and from Phoenix, which is what drives the economy,
visitors, yeah, it's good for
has
the
been
economy.
going up very, very rapidly. And when you look at our passenger mix at Sky Harbor, and this is important. Now you get me in my geeky,
No,
in my
I want you to
geeky
be your
role.
geeky.
My
I
geeky
find
role
it
a little
interesting.
bit
I think
here.
some of our viewers will as well.
Is that Sky Harbor as a hub, a dual hub for both Southwest and American, about 65% of our passengers are actually coming to Phoenix or leaving from Phoenix, not just changing planes here, which is very high for hub airports. When you take an airport like Charlotte, it's probably 85% of the people are just connecting in Charlotte. You take an airport like Atlanta, it's probably 80 or 85% of the people in Atlanta are just changing planes in Atlanta. But in Phoenix, we have a very high percentage of our passengers actually coming to and from the valley, which is very good for the economy here.
Having changed planes in both those airports you just mentioned, that doesn't do much for your hotels, that doesn't do much for your local restaurants. You know, it might do something for the airport revenue with the restaurants in the airports, but that's it. I don't feel like I visited Atlanta if I just was in the airport.
Right,
So,
but to see that growth in those origin and destination passengers, that speaks to the strength of the economy here in Phoenix and in Arizona.
and people want to come here.
Exactly.
So they're making a concerted effort to come here and stay for a while and then either leave or maybe stay permanently. But so one question I get asked a lot is Terminal 2. You know, kind of what's the future look like for Terminal 2, and what does the airport look like going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get asked that a lot. Let's do a quick history lesson. The first terminal that was at Sky Harbor Airport in the 30s was up on the north side off of Air Lane. And there actually used to be a wedding chapel and a wedding bell, and people would actually go up there and get married at the airport. But then as air transportation grew, the city built what used to be called Terminal 1 in the 50s. And that was on the west side of the airport. And then very quickly, Terminal 1 filled up, and the city moved further to the east and built Terminal 2. And Terminal 2 was going to take Phoenix into the jet age, and that was going to be the terminal for the airport. It filled up very rapidly, so Phoenix then moved further to the east again and built Terminal 3. And then Terminal 3 was going to be the state-of-the-art terminal, the last terminal that was ever needed at Sky Harbor, until it wasn't. And then an airline showed up in Phoenix called America West Airlines. And passenger traffic grew exponentially. So then enter Terminal 4. Now Terminal 4 is full. We're actually building the last 8-gate concourse on Terminal 4. Now we're moving back to the west. So now we're back to Terminal 3, which is being remodeled and expanded. Once that project is complete, then Terminal 2 airlines will be relocated into Terminal 3, the new expanded Terminal 3, and then we will demolish Terminal 2 and all of its facilities as we move back to the west. And what we will be doing over time is then making an area west of Terminal 3 on the sites roughly of Terminal 2 and the old Terminal 1, and getting that area ready for a new terminal when demand warrants the construction of that facility.
Any idea when that would be?
I never forecast when that will be. But
Well, what would it take? I mean, is there a metric? Is there a number of passengers?
well, it is demand driven. It's 100% demand driven. And building new terminals is very expensive. You have a certain fixed cost associated with it, regardless of how many gates you may build. So you have to have a sufficient demand to warrant the construction.
How much are we talking?
How much money
Yeah.
to build it? To build a new...
If we were going to do it today, what would be the price tag?
A ballpark estimate on a new west terminal today, I think in 2008, I actually think the aviation staff were in front of City Council discussing that, and I want to say it was around $1 billion
So more now.
Yeah, it's probably about that, because you have a huge fixed cost that you have to invest, once again, regardless of how many gates you build.
Does it help to have had an old terminal there, any of the pipes or anything, or is it just starting from scratch?
Yeah, start from scratch. Wow. But as we are completing the Phoenix SkyTrain from Terminal 3 out to the rental car center, we are making provisions for a future terminal by building the framework necessary for a SkyTrain station that would be integrated within the terminal when it is time for that to be built.
So the idea is you fly in, you take the SkyTrain out to the rental car, you come back from your visit, you get the rental car area, and you take that back to the terminals, and then you could hit all the terminals, including this proposed new one eventually, and then you don't have to use the bus system, which people are so familiar with now.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
What happens to the buses?
Well, we'll retire the bus system. Right now,
The entire bus system will go away eventually.
we will always have a few buses because they're critical for backup plans. You know, SkyTrain is 99.99% reliable, but every now and then you have to do maintenance on it or it shuts down, and you need backup bus transportation, but it won't be on a regularly scheduled basis. So it'll be a much smaller fleet for irregular operations.
And the parking that people are used to, that's also potentially going to be changing.
Parking will be changing also. So as we tear down Terminal 2 and finish SkyTrain, we'll be losing the parking associated with Terminal 2 and also the West Park and Walk. And we've been discussing with City Council the opportunity to build a new west parking garage at around 24th Street and Buckeye Road, and hopefully Council will authorize us to head in that direction.
Parking structure is a few $100 million?
It's probably between 150, 200 million just for a large parking structure.
Yeah, so these are big capital outlays for big economic engine in the city of Phoenix, obviously really the state of Arizona. How much of the air traffic, I guess I'm assuming you know this, if you don't, I guess so you don't, but how much of the air traffic in Phoenix goes through, or in Arizona, excuse me, goes through Sky Harbor? I mean, because there are a lot of other airports, obviously.
Right,
but
right. I do not know the exact number, but I would say that probably a good 90% or more of all of the air travel to and from Arizona comes through Sky Harbor.
Yeah, and the underlying point, you don't have to have an exact number. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but if you're coming in to visit family in Flagstaff, or you want to go see the Red Rocks in Sedona, or you're going down to Tucson, you're probably coming through Sky Harbor at some point.
Well, Tucson has very good service to destinations, so you don't necessarily have to come through Phoenix.
You don't have to, but there's a decent chance that you
And Flagstaff also has some service, but they also have service to Phoenix, so you may fly into Sky Harbor and connect and fly up to Flagstaff.
Yeah, so you know, a lot of the economic development of the state, the tourists and the big games and everything, it's coming through this airport. So it's not surprising that it's noisy and that sometimes, you know, feathers get ruffled in neighborhoods, and we completely understand that. At the same time, it's not going anywhere. So to your point earlier about working in harmony with the community, it's really necessary because it is a fixed asset, maybe would be a way I'd put it. We're not moving it somewhere else. It's not going anywhere else. It's there, and it's expanding, and it's liable to have more passengers than ever in the future. We've got 44 million right now. How much has that grown, you know, in the last 20 years or so?
You know, that's a great question, and most people don't understand this fact, and these are not 100% accurate numbers because I don't have the stats in front of me. Right. But we have about 130,000 fewer aircraft landings and takeoffs at Sky Harbor a year, about 130,000 fewer than we did 15 years ago at the airport. Yet the passenger traffic has increased by over 10 million passengers in the same time period.
Wow, it's a shocking statistic. It seems counterintuitive.
Aircraft are larger, load factors are higher, so you have fewer airplanes carrying more people on each flight.
So the airlines are being more efficient basically?
The airlines are more efficient.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's what you want to see. For a long time, I just know as someone who's from Illinois originally, and so I'd fly back at the holidays and stuff. it was actually cheaper for me to fly for a good chunk of this millennium than it was in the early 90s when I first moved out here. Probably for the reasons you suggest. Now that's changed in recent years, but it is interesting that the airlines have made adjustments, and so we can grow while using, I assume, theoretically less fuel and less wear and tear in the airlines because there's fewer airlines in the air, flying fewer trips, but more people are being moved from one place to another.
Aircraft are more efficient. They're considerably quieter than they used to be. And it's just a great opportunity to move a lot of people very efficiently. And Phoenix, going back to your point about the fixed asset, Arizona and Phoenix is very fortunate to have its major economic engine so centrally located here in the valley. But airports are also extremely capital intensive. And it takes a lot of money to try to keep up with the facility needs of an airport as big as Sky Harbor. That's why we have a $2 billion investment program underway right now, where we will invest about $2 billion in the next 4.5 to 5 years at Sky Harbor, just to keep up with demand that we have right now. And the beauty of that, though, is that we are also self-sustaining business enterprises. So this is not general fund revenue. This is not taxpayer revenue. It is a purely business type operation where the companies pay to be in business there. The money that they pay to be in business, the airlines, the restaurants, when our customers come out and park at the airport and use any of the services, those contributions is what funds the airport, not taxpayer revenue.
Self-sustaining, so we're not asking people in District 2 or any of the other districts, hey, we need to raise your taxes to pay for airport operations.
You don't use the airport, then you benefit from it without having to pay for it.
So we have contracts. People go through the terminals, obviously, and they see the restaurants. You got really a nice variety of restaurants. I have friends who really like the restaurants in the airport. Excuse me. How does that come about? How do those get selected, and where does that money go?
Well, we do a competitive process for those business opportunities, and then once we go through that competitive process, we bring recommended vendors to council. Council approves those contracts. Then the money that they pay, the rent that they pay, comes to Aviation, and that's what helps fund future investments.
The $2 billion and so forth.
That's what helps fund the future investments in the airport.
So we're not paying the restaurants to be there. They're paying
us.
Effectively the taxpayers, because then taxpayers don't have to get taxed to fund the airport. So the airlines pay for the gates.
They pay rent and they pay landing fees, so they help maintain the airfield and the runways and the taxiways. And like you said, the rent that they pay, the fees that they pay to use our facilities.
So is there anything I'm missing on sort of the big ways? I know the cab services and the parking, obviously. Do you have a breakdown of sort of the components of the airport budget, and how does that all fit together from the things we just mentioned?
Sure. We refer to our budget essentially as airside and the airline related revenues, and then non-aeronautical or non-airline revenues, the two major groupings. So airline revenues account for about 40 or so, a little over 40% of our budget, and the non-airline revenues count for about 60% of our revenues that we generate. So the airlines are paying, like I said, to land their airplanes, their gates, their ticketing lobbies, all of that. They pay rent for that on the facilities they use. And we only charge them by federal regulation the actual cost of providing those services to them. And then that other 60% comes from a variety of sources. It comes from parking revenue, rental cars pay us rent to be in the rental car business at the airport, at the concessions that we were just talking about in the terminal, land leases that we have with various companies where they have hangars or other investments on the airport. That's the source of all of the other revenue.
So these business partners, if you will, do they have input in how you're remodeling the terminal? Do the airlines have sort of say, hey, we need you to work on this or that? Does that happen? Is there interaction there?
Absolutely. We have stakeholder working groups on all of our investment programs that we develop at the airport. everybody sits at the table and has an opportunity to participate.
Well, Jim, I really appreciate it. I know this was your childhood dream, was to run an airport. So you got one of the big ones. So you're sort of a Hall of Fame aviation director then, if that is the metric. And so we really appreciate all your efforts. Thank you for your help in helping citizens in my district with the overflight issue, because that's been a really irritating one that I thought was very unnecessary, and we really appreciate your working on it. So thank you for that. And if you have any questions or comments, please call my office at 602-262-7445 or visit my website at phoenix.gov/district2. We look forward to seeing you next time on The Issues.